Of course, the question is what kind of wrench is the U.S. going to throw into the machine this time around? Because every time everybody has been trying to kind of get around a unified message, it hasn't worked. It didn't work at the G7 summit, and it hasn't worked before. And so we all know what the problem is. The question is, can we unify, and will the United States align itself with its NATO allies to make sure that our message is consistent and strong?
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today we've had Sir Bill Browder on the show. There is so much to unpack when it comes to Israel, Iran, Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump. There is so much happening. So we discuss the updates with the Israel and Iran conflict, the fact that Donald Trump brokered a ceasefire that both countries have now violated. We speak about how Vladimir Putin benefits from this war and how does he not benefit. So we speak about that. The NATO Summit kicks off today, so we speak about the important subjects that need to be discussed and whether fellow NATO allies are going to bring forward a few things for Donald Trump to focus on. So all that today on the Trump Report. You can watch us every day, Monday through Friday on Times Radio's YouTube, or you can stream us as a podcast anywhere you get your podcasts. So Bill Browder, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Great to be here.
Well, we're going to try and keep as up to date as we possibly can because the situation between Israel and Iran and the United States is, of course, evolving and developing by the minute. So the latest update is, of course, Donald Trump. He orchestrated and brokered this ceasefire between Israel and Iran that was put in place this morning. Both countries have now violated it. Donald Trump has clearly woken up to find that this ceasefire he brokered has been violated by both parties. He's now sent out a message. He said, they don't know what the F they're doing. I'm going to see if I can stop it. These guys had better calm down. I didn't like that Israel unloaded right after we made the deal. I'm not happy about it. I'm really unhappy if Israel is going out this morning. I think they both violated it. So do you wonder, is Donald Trump's boasting of brokering this ceasefire bill a little bit premature?
Well, you remember he was the one who also promised everybody that he would solve the Russia-Ukraine war in 24 hours on the campaign trail. I mean, he's a man who tends to exaggerate. He's one who tends to oversimplify. This is a very complicated problem in the Middle East. It's not something that you can just snap your fingers and make it all go away. And so I think it's, the Putin's promise of a ceasefire, and then 10 minutes later he's bombing the Ukrainians. It seems very much the Iranians and the Israelis all going at it with all guns blazing. I think it's pretty unrealistic at this point, given what's happened, that either side is going to pull back from the brink.
I mean, as you pointed out, we've seen this all before, exactly with the supposed ceasefire over Easter between Ukraine and Russia. But if this ceasefire does continue, Bill, both countries hold off from striking each other, we enter a forever peace, as Donald Trump put it, that these countries will forever be at peace. He's brokered the deal. They cannot continue fighting. And that happens, and there's actual peace in the Middle East, as the saying going. But do you see Donald Trump then switching back to focus attention on Russia and Ukraine?
Well, so this is the big problem that Zelensky has, and it started on October 7th when Hamas invaded Israel. All of a sudden, the Ukrainian situation, the unbelievable nastiness of Vladimir Putin, went onto the back burner as everybody focused on the atrocities there. And now, of course, both Gaza and Ukraine are on the back burner as everybody focuses on the bunker busting bombs and volleying back and forth between Israel and Iran. And so the problem with the world is that we kind of can only focus on one thing at a time. And as a result, it gets worse and worse for Ukraine because Putin continues to bomb Ukrainian civilians every day. And now, of course, nobody's paying attention. And so I think this gives Putin a lot more latitude to do all the nasty stuff he wants to do without anyone focusing on it.
Well, we've seen Donald Trump obviously vow to create a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Now, at this stage, it's really meant to be in place, but of course, we've seen those violations. We might see a ceasefire actually continue in the next day or so, depending on how Donald Trump responds to Israel and Iran and what methods of threats he puts out to both Israel and Iran, because he's also mad at Israel, not just Iran, as he's mentioned in this comment. But so he's got the Israel and Iran ceasefire potentially. He was not what India says, but potentially involved in brokering India and Pakistan ceasefire last month. So I wonder, Bill, does this give Donald Trump the motivation to help Ukraine win the war, even if it's for selfish reasons, such as being nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize? Because we know that's what he wants if he has the first 6 months in office and he's helped negotiate 3 ceasefires.
Well, there's no ceasefires that I can see where people are ceasefiring. And so I think it's a bit I sort of strongly doubt that there's any Nobel Peace Prize in the offing for Donald Trump. But at the same time, I mean, you asked, is he going to now help Ukraine? And he has shown no indication at any point that he wants to help Ukraine. He has a sort of he's attracted to Putin. He wants to be Putin's friend. He wants Russia to be an ally. And everything he said and has done since he's been president has shown that he's not on Ukraine's side. So I think it'd be very unlikely that all of a sudden he changes course and starts supporting Ukraine. Of course, I would like that, and most of the free world would like that, but I don't see that coming. I don't see any probability of that at all happening.
In the last day, we've seen Russia's defense minister vow that Russia will stand by Iran, and Putin also condemned US strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. So we've seen these words from Putin, but we actually haven't seen much physical help given to Iran from Russia. But what do you think this 12-day war has shown people watching on when it comes to Vladimir Putin?
Well, I mean, the first thing that it does is it shows Vladimir Putin and Xi of China and various other dictators that, if the Americans get involved, life can become very unpleasant very quickly. And I don't think Putin has anything to worry about at the moment. I think Xi does in China. And so, Trump has, with his sort of crazy man approach, he's created a proper uncertainty and potential deterrence to evil actors elsewhere in the world. If he's going to go in with B-2 bombers and bunker busters into Iran, which nobody has been willing to do for the last 20 years, it shows his willingness to do all sorts of outside the box stuff. And so, it's likely that a lot of bad guys like Vladimir Putin are sort of scratching their heads and wondering, where's the line that they may cross that will get Donald Trump mad at them? And if he is mad, he could do some really bad stuff.
Well, yeah, of course, you've mentioned that numerous times, that it has felt that, of course, that Putin is playing Trump, that he's trying to see how far he can push him. But yes, of course, we've seen the US use US military to get into Iran and completely, what they say, totally destroy the nuclear facilities, Bill. But how do you think Putin is viewing Donald Trump in the aftermath of US involvement? Do you think he is threatened? Do you think he's looking at him from a point of strength now?
Well, he's, Donald Trump certainly looks strong now for sort of breaking all the taboos that other presidents held them back on striking Iran. And regardless of what anyone thinks of Donald Trump, I think the Iranians had it coming to them, and everybody else has been too cautious. There's no, there's no nuclear war that started as a result of this. I don't know whether Iran's capabilities have been destroyed or not, but they had it coming, and good on him for striking the nuclear facilities. Now, so what does Putin think? I think Putin still is probably feeling like he's got a good relationship with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump probably thinks he has a good relationship with Putin. And my big fear right now, and this is one which could really go the wrong way for Ukraine, is if Putin now steps up and says, listen, I know the Iranians, they're my friends, I can mediate, and then does some type of mediation, whatever that means. And then Donald Trump says, well, we can't support Ukraine anymore because, look, we've got bigger fish to fry. Putin is mediating with Iran, and that's what we care about at the moment. And if Putin succeeds in that, then Ukraine could really get sold down the river.
Well, on the other hand, Bill, there's also the option that Donald Trump uses that as the way he's acted, the way he's fronted up with Iran as motivation for now taking out Putin, for, laying down the law to Vladimir Putin. Is that the kind of less likely scenario, do you think?
Well, so far up until this minute, Donald Trump has shown no indication that he has any kind of dissatisfaction with Putin. He's mentioned a couple times, that guy's crazy, why is he doing these bombings? But when it comes to sanctions and other types of tough measures, which he could do, he hasn't done. And when it comes to continued support for Ukraine, military aid for Ukraine, he hasn't done. And so I think that we would be wishfully thinking to suggest that he's all of a sudden going to change his tactics towards Putin.
You mentioned that the war between Israel and Iran has taken the headlines, taken the limelight off Vladimir Putin and his war on Ukraine. But I wonder, Bill, has this conflict has it hurt or helped Russia? Because we know that, of course, Iran provides a lot of weaponry to Russia. But if you had to pick whether the conflict has helped or hurt Russia, where would you lean?
I would lean towards it hurting Russia. I think this, of course, Russia is aligned with Iran. As you mentioned, they get a lot of weapons from Iran. They do trade together. And perhaps most importantly, they're part of this axis of authoritarians, where they're sort of thumbing their nose at all of us reasonable liberal democracies. And so it doesn't help Putin to have one of his allies in that area getting so brutally attacked. Now, there is some silver lining to this whole thing, which is that as a result of all the uncertainty in the Middle East, oil price has gone up. I mean, it's all over the place, but it's gone up, particularly since, quote, Liberation Day when it went down. And so Putin, who's completely dependent on oil, at least he can lick his wounds and enjoy the oil revenue coming in as a result of all this nastiness going on in the Middle East.
President Zelensky, he told Sky News, Bill, that he believes that Vladimir Putin doesn't have the capabilities to attack a NATO country in the coming months, but he believes he will do so within 5 years after he's rebuilt his Russian army, with the goal being to test NATO's alliance. Do you see that happening if there aren't procedures in place, if these NATO countries, including the United States, are not hard enough on Putin and Russia right now?
Absolutely. I think he's being very realistic. And it all comes down to Ukraine. As long as Putin is bogged down in Ukraine, he has no capacity to go after anyone else. But if he were to succeed in Ukraine, or if Ukraine were to surrender, or various of the things that have been pushed on Ukraine by President Trump, then absolutely NATO countries, and particularly the Baltic states and Poland, are on the front line. And Putin needs to continuously be at war in order to have his people not get mad at him, but get mad at a foreign enemy. This is sort of wag the dog. This is, the Machiavelli 101, create a foreign enemy and start a war. And Putin has one huge superpower, which we need to be aware of. He may not have the best military, even after he rebuilds it compared to NATO, but he has an enormous capacity, an unbelievable capacity to sustain losses of personnel. More than 1 million Russian young men have either been killed or wounded in action. And those numbers would destroy any democracy. And so he can go in with cannon fodder, throw all these people to their death, not care. But even if we sustain, 1/10 of those losses in a fight with him, our democracies would all fold. We can't sustain those types of losses. We've never had those types of losses. And so whatever his weaknesses are, his big strength is that he's just brutal. And he doesn't care what he loses as long as we lose something and the losses that we sustain end up crumbling our democracies.
So he's had a lot of losses in his own war, Bill. Of course, we know that his army hasn't been as successful as Ukraine, so he's got that. And then, of course, he's sustained a few losses, as you mentioned. He's more hurt than helped by the conflict going on in Iran. So with that in mind, knowing that potentially Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin and the Russian army are in a more weak position than they have been before, with all eyes on how Donald Trump is going to, I guess, deal with the dictators of the world, should this be, and dealing with Putin and crippling Russia's economy and making sure he ends the war, should that be the number one main focus of the NATO summit, which is getting kicked off today?
Well, that will be the main focus of the NATO summit. Everybody acknowledges that Putin is the existential threat when it comes to Europe. As Zelensky said, he probably will attack a NATO country. Everybody who's on the border with Russia feels like they're potentially at extreme risk of a Russian invasion. And so there's every thought has to go into how do you create such a deterrence that Putin doesn't try to do that. And that's what they will talk about at the NATO summit. Of course, the question is what kind of wrench is the U.S. going to throw into the machine this time around? Because every time everybody has been trying to kind of get around a unified message, it hasn't worked. It didn't work at the G7 summit, and it hasn't worked before. And so we all know what the problem is. The question is, can we unify, and will the United States align itself with its NATO allies to make sure that our message is consistent and strong?
Well, yes, of course, we saw Donald Trump leave the G7 early, Bill, before proper discussions about the war, the Russia-Ukraine war, even really kicked off, before President Zelensky even arrived to have his scheduled third in-person meeting with Donald Trump. So, yes, all eyes will be on Donald Trump. He is meant to be going to the NATO summit. We don't know if he will bail early. We don't know if we'll be watching to see when he's there. But if Donald Trump doesn't align with NATO leaders when it comes to ending this war, how, I guess, positive will it be going forward? Does it need the US to be right on board, or can the fellow NATO countries and European allies do this on their own?
Well, it's interesting. I heard a good analogy earlier today, which is that in NATO, America is the hub, and the other countries are the spokes of the wheel. And without the hub, then everything comes undone. And so it doesn't mean that all the European countries who are members of NATO can't reinvent a defense organization. But while there's this uncertainty, which is definitely hanging over their heads, it's kind of hard to know what to do. And nobody wants to sort of take the decision, well, America's out of the game, because if they take that decision, it's a very expensive decision to take. And so at the moment, what everybody is thinking in all these other countries is, how do we placate and convince Donald Trump to just stay in the game, and hopefully for long enough so that when his term ends, nothing drastic has happened that causes all the European countries to have to double or triple down on their defense expenditure.
Well, that will be a hot topic in the next few days, of course, is defense spending, Bill. Trump, some allies, they want every country to be upping their defense spending to 5% by 2035. President Zelensky says that 2035 target is too slow. Every country should be at 5% before then. But if NATO countries, some NATO countries, fail to commit to this 5% spending, or persuade Donald Trump at least that they plan to get there, how will this create further tension between these NATO allies, do you think?
Well, I mean, if everybody got to 5%, then we can all breathe calmly and easily that we have the military capacity to hold off all foreign enemies. The problem with getting to 5% is that a lot of countries are very, very far below 5%. And we're in a world of belt tightening, of economic stress. In every country, you have budgets that are being very tightly managed. That tax revenues aren't coming in the way they should. Tax rates are having to go up, and various other types of things have to be cut. And so the idea of going to dramatically increasing government expenditure means that either taxes have to go up or spending elsewhere has to go down, and probably both. And those are all very unpopular things, which will make it very difficult for most European leaders to stay in power if they're forced to do this.
In the hypothetical situation, Bill, where most NATO allies do commit to the 5% GDP spending for the 2035 target, they do say yes, they'll do that. They understand how important it is, but they don't get reassurance from Donald Trump that he's willing to protect Ukraine, willing to take Putin down. How do you think that will create tension?
Well, I think it's just it creates tension in the sense that it means that we and the rest of the world are on our own. But if everybody gets to 5%, then the U.S. involvement in NATO is not as existentially important as it is right now. Right now, everybody in Europe understands that Europe may not exist if America doesn't continue to support its NATO allies.
Just a final question, Bill. This sanctions bill proposed by Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal proposed on April 1st, so quite a while away. It was aimed at hitting countries who are importing Russian oil with a 500% tariff. Of course, as you and I have spoken about numerous lengths, this is a great way to really cripple Russia's economy. Now, yesterday on the US Senate floor, senators said they stand ready and they're wanting to act this week on this bill. Is this something that we might see fellow NATO leaders this week urge Donald Trump to support, to bring this to the Senate floor to get this passed?
Well, I think that all NATO allies want to put a lot of pressure on Putin. They're all frustrated that the United States is lagging and Europe is leading. This would be one very important way to move forward. This is a congressional initiative, not a presidential initiative. And these senators, if they wanted to, could put it on the Senate floor right now, vote it into place. They've got so many co-sponsors that there's no probability of a veto, and then Trump will have to do it. It seems that the Republicans who are co-sponsoring, particularly Lindsey Graham, is definitely taking some type of cue from the White House.
Well, yeah, you mentioned that so far I think there's around 82 senators that are supporting this. 82 senators out of 100 supporting this bill. But yes, you mentioned they can just pass this. Does that show to you that the Republican senators are worried about how Donald Trump would react if they essentially went around him?
They absolutely are. They're terrified of him. I've seen lots of legislation bypass other presidents that they weren't happy with, but the Republicans really are terrified of Donald Trump and upsetting him for sure.
Bill Browder, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you.